It's not what it used to be, I guess. But so thank you for joining us. He's been working a lot with how you deal with people and decision making and how that affects things, which I think is very valuable, especially to engineers. And it kind of fits in very well with how we try to work with people. So I think without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Dr. Jaspersky.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. All right, everyone. So let's talk about decision-making for engineers. And we're going to be basing this in extensive research in neuroscience and behavioral science about how we behave and how our mind causes us to behave in good ways and in some bad ways. So the first part of it will be about some of the mistakes we tend to make, and the second part of it will be about some of the ways we can address these mistakes. Now, the first thing to do is thinking about decision-making in daily life. It's not even in work, in daily life. Let's think about being confident. Now, you've probably heard that in making decisions, you need to be confident. It doesn't only apply to the work setting. It applies to other settings as well. Like I said, personal life. Let's say you're driving a car. It's going to be important for you to be confident when you're merging onto a highway to not slow down. It's important to speed up. And the same thing when you're changing lanes. It's important to speed up rather than slow down, to show confidence when you're doing that. So when you're thinking about driving, how good are your driving skills, would you say? So about yourself, thinking about your driving skills, let's take a look at a poll. And so please vote on whether you are in the top half or in the bottom half of all drivers. So the top half or bottom half of all drivers, where would you put yourself? So about half of you participated. Make sure the rest of you make your voice heard. All right, so we see that 83% of us are in the top half and 17% of us are in the bottom half. Now, you're engineers, you know that's not the way it works. You know that average is average. We should have a bell curve distribution, should be maybe, even if you're a little bit above average, should be no more than 60%. But this is the kind of results I get in other presentations to IEEE or other people, because we tend to suffer from a problem called the overconfidence bias, where we tend to be too confident, way too confident about decision making. When people say they're 100% confident about something, bet the farm, bet your career, bet the house, you're only going to be right about 80% of the time on average. So when we look at research, when people say they're 100% right, they would be right about 80% of the time. So no wonder that Las Vegas makes so much money, right? And no wonder that the smart money in the stock market makes so much money against retail investors. This is a serious problem for us. Our tendency to be too confident is especially dangerous for people with more experience, more authority. So if you think of the overconfidence, it would tend to be people who are more experienced. So if you've been, let's say, a professor for a longer period of time, and I've been a professor for a while, there tends to be a sense that, hey, my knowledge is right, I shouldn't change my mind. That's when you look at how paradigms change in academia. It tends to be not because individual people change their minds, but because older generations die out. And because people tend to be more stuck in their mindsets, more confident, the older and more experienced they get. And so this is a problem. I mean, there was studied, for example, on doctors. So there was a comparison of some young doctors who just finished medical school and some older doctors who are out of medical school for at least a decade, some senior doctors. And they were given a case example of a patient to diagnose and recommend a course of treatment. And they got the case example, diagnosis, and recommendation of course of treatment right at about the same rates, the junior doctors and the senior doctors. But the senior doctors were way more confident, meaning that they were much less likely to change their minds once evidence showed that their original diagnosis was not correct. Now, why is that? Well, why did they get it right at the same rate? Of course, senior doctors have more know-how and experience, but junior doctors, of course, have fresher knowledge just coming out of medical school. And that is why they got it right at about the same rate. But senior doctors were way more confident. So this is a problem for us. So you want to realize that a tendency that people often say is, go with your gut. You're not sure what to do. You don't have like 100% data. You should go with your gut, trust your intuition, follow your heart, and so on. So you hear that often. You hear that from both pop culture gurus like Tony Robbins, who says, be primal, be savage, or even gurus who are claim to have more research basis, like Malcolm Gladwell, who says, blink, make your decision in the blink of an eye. That's a problem. There's a good reason they get paid a lot of money, these gurus, to tell you what feels comfortable for us to do. So our gut, trusting our gut, feels very comfortable. It feels very good to us. But it can lead to some disastrous decisions because our gut reactions, our intuitions, did not evolve for the modern environment. I mean, think about it. The modern environment, with us being able to interact like this on a small screen, doing remote work, I mean, that's a major topic we can talk about in the Q&A. That's been around for the last decade or so. But we've not evolved for it. We've tried to adapt for it, but we're not evolved for it. Our intuitions are misaligned with doing work remotely, many other aspects of the modern environment. Our intuitions are misaligned. And our intuitions are very well aligned with the ancient savannah. That's what we evolved for. When we lived in small tribes of 50 people to 150 people, we're hunters, gatherers, foragers. That's what our intuitions are good for. And as a result, we have a series of dangerous judgment errors called cognitive biases. So cognitive biases are the specific ways that our brain is miswired. That comes from our evolutionary background, like I talked about, and just the structure of our brain. The structure of our brain has a lot of heuristics, shortcuts, because our brain is designed to be lazy, meaning using the least amount of energy. In the savanna environment, that was very important because we had very low calories. We had to fight for every calorie, and the brain used a lot of glucose when it does its thing. And so the brain is designed to use as little glucose as possible, as little energy as possible, and make decisions as quickly as possible with minimal information available. And in certain situations, like overconfidence, that causes it to go, make serious errors. Oh, the other thing about overconfidence I want to mention, the reason, of course, it's there is because it's important. It was important in the savanna environment when we lived in hunter-gatherers to make decisions very quickly. When you heard a sound, you have to decide very quickly whether it's a saber-toothed tiger or just a branch breaking. And it was very beneficial for us, for our survival, the survival of our ancestors, to leap to conclusions, quickly and make the decision quickly. And so that it was important for us to be overconfident. It was better for us to jump and run away at 100 shadows, 100 kind of branch breaking events, rather than miss that one saber-toothed tiger. We're the descendants of those who jumped at 100 sounds, and not the descendants of those who missed the saber-toothed tiger because they refused to jump at the sounds, because they waited for more information to be more confident. In the modern world, we have many less dangerous environments that we face, but we still get in a lot of trouble now because of that overconfidence, because of that jumping to conclusions. So that's an example. That's a dangerous judgment error and how it's linked to that savanna environment. Another dangerous judgment error so overconfidence bias, really important for engineers to address. Another one is called the planning fallacy. The planning fallacy. We assume it feels to us like the future will go according to plan. You've probably heard the phrase that failing to plan is planning to fail. Failing to plan is planning to fail. Unfortunately, that's kind of a misleading phrase. It suggests that, hey, if you make a plan, everything will go fine. That's not the way it works in reality. In reality, if you make a plan, then you really need to be thinking about how can this plan go awry. So a much better phrase is failing to plan for problems is planning to fail. Failing to plan for problems is planning to fail. That's what I teach people to use. That's a much better phrase. But that's not the way we think. That's not how it feels to us. Our gut feels that when we make a plan, everything should go according to plan, because we like ourselves, we are confident about ourselves, And when we make a plan, we feel confident that everything will go fine because we feel good about it. We're the ones who made it. And so that's something that we really underestimate, all the problems and challenges that can come with the problems, risks that can come with the plan. So we underestimate the resources we need of time, money, information, social capital. Interesting study about this done on college students. So there were college students who had a term paper due, so the final paper of the term. And they were separated to two groups. One group was asked if at the midpoint of the semester, if everything goes perfectly, if everything goes great, how much time do you anticipate you'll need to finish up the term paper? And they said 8 weeks. And then another group was asked, well, how much time do you think you'll need to finish up the term paper? And they said 8 weeks. So that is an example of how our intuitions lead us astray very often in educational settings and in all sorts of other settings. So if you're thinking about, let's say, software engineers, how much time will it take you to make this program, or various schematics, or write a grant, how much time will it take you to write a grant? It's very intuitive for us to equate the best case scenario with the actual scenario, that we think that the best case, that what will happen in reality is the best case scenario. Of course, it doesn't. There will inevitably be delays in the vast majority of cases, and we might require some more resources of various sorts. We might require more information, more social capital, money, as well as time. But we don't anticipate that. That's not part of our intuition. Now, let's talk about this example of the planning fallacy. How important do you think it would be for you and your team, to the extent that you're part of a team, to address this planning fallacy? Please go ahead and vote. Okay, I see that 83% of you participated. Give 5 more seconds to the last person to make their voice heard. Okay, so we see that 2/3 of you would find it highly valuable and 1/3 of you would find it moderately valuable. So great, so everyone finds it valuable, highly or moderately. So I suggest you think about this problem and think about how you can address it in your own work, in your team's work, because this is definitely a big challenge that I've seen with engineers be a serious issue. All right, let's talk about another problem, normalcy bias. So normalcy bias is the tendency to assume that the future will be normal, much like today. So think about yourself in 5 years from now. What do you imagine yourself to be in 5 years from now? Now think about it. The large majority of us would imagine us to be largely like ourselves, share our values, share our preferences, our habits, our intuitions, be a little bit smarter, a little bit older, hopefully a little bit wiser, experienced, and maybe some more money, whatever other things like that. So that's us in 5 years from now. But take a moment to think about yourself 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, think about who you were like as a person. If you think of yourself 5 years ago, you probably have some values that are somewhat different than they are right now. You maybe have some different habits, some different predispositions, some different ways of looking at the world, different sort of resources, interests, and so on, different relationships. But it's completely not intuitive to us to realize that the way we changed over the last 5 years is likely to be similar to the way that we will change over the next 5 years. The past history is the best predictor of future events, right? And that's not intuitive to us. We don't feel that. We feel that the future will be normal. And whether that applies to ourselves or the world. Now, you've probably heard about Chat GPT coming out with OpenAI. We've read the headlines, and not that many people are realizing what kind of an impact on the world Chat GPT will have. And that's just an example of something, of a new tool that might be world transforming, that ChatGPT combined with a number of other AI tools like DALI, Art Generation, and Lumina AI, and other AI tools that are going to pretty drastically transform the world, quite possibly in 5 years. And there's not a guarantee, but it's an example of something that's developing right now. And of course, we have other issues. What about the pandemic? We had a pandemic that was transformed the world in fundamental ways. More of us are working remotely. Many more of us have different predispositions about our preferences, leisure time, and so on. But we tend not to think about these things and how we changed over the last 5 years. We might change more over the next 5 years, depending on what the world will be like, right? So we tend to have this assumption, and we underestimate the changes in the future. We forecast short-term future and the long-term future based on the long-term past. So we underestimate major disruptions, major serious disruptions to our lives and to the world and to our organizations. Now, how valuable do you think it would be for you and your team to address this problem, the normalcy bias? Please go ahead and vote. All right. 5 of you participated. We still have one more. Give you 5 more seconds to make your voice heard. All right, so we see that this was even more important than the planning fallacy. 80% perceive it as highly valuable and 20% as moderately valuable. So again, really important clearly to take next steps to address it. Good. So let's talk about how to address these problems. So we talked about some of the problems, some examples of these problems: overconfidence bias, planning fallacy, normalcy bias. There are many, many others. There are over 100 cognitive biases. I gathered together the 30 most dangerous ones for professional settings, the 30 most dangerous cognitive biases, in an assessment on dangerous judgment errors in the workplace, which can help you evaluate their extent and impact in your workplace and in your own work. And if you're a student in your own work as a student, if you're a professor in your class and all in your research, grant applications. So it provides you with the next steps for addressing them. So let's take a look at this assessment. I want you to open up the chat. We'll be using the chat for this portion of the presentation. So this is the beginning of the assessment. Let's go through it. This is the description. I should mention this. So the directions. Each question refers to a problem that might occur in everyday professional situations. So think about how often it occurred in your work, in your workplace, and your studying over the past year. The answer for each question will be in percentage terms. Don't overthink it. Just give your first initial impression. This should take you 15 to 20 seconds per question. So let's take a look at question number 1. What percentage of projects missed a deadline or went over budget in the past year? So what percentage of projects in your experience in your workplace? Please chat that in the chat. So please go ahead and put it into the chat. So 70%, 5%. Other folks? What are your impressions of how many projects? 80%? Anyone else wants to share? Think about it again. Should take not busy enough, right? You take on more projects, Steve. Okay, other people are thinking about it. Let's, in the meantime, go to number 2. Percentage of team conflicts that occurred because someone in the conflict overestimated the effectiveness of their communication skills and persuasiveness. So this is number 2. So Daniel says 20%. Other folks, when conflicts occur, how often do they occur because someone overestimated how effective they are communicating and persuading others? 50%. 70%. So when you're thinking about these answers, if it's 5 to 10%, like Steve had in the planning fallacy, it's not a big deal. It happens. If it's 10 to 20%, it's kind of becoming more of a moderate problem. If it's more than 20%, it's becoming more of a serious problem and kind of messing with your team, your projects, and so on. So, of course, the first one is about the planning fallacy. And that means that if you're having numbers over 20%, then you're misallocating resources. Team conflicts that occurred because someone overestimated the effectiveness of their skills, that's about the illusion of transparency, where we tend to perceive that we are highly effective at communicating to others, and we are much less effective. In reality, this is an illusion, that we are transparent, that our messages, our mental states, our emotions are transparent to others. It's actually much harder for others to read our messages and communications, and much harder for them to communicate effectively. So we need to over communicate and check to make sure the other person understood our communications. Number 3, of all significant decisions, in what percentage of cases was someone overconfident about the decision? Please go ahead and share your thoughts. Of all significant decisions over the past year. So 75%.
So in our group or in our organization?
You can answer for either. Depends on what you want to do. Either is fine. Again, this can be applied to your group, to your organization, to your own work. So 75%. Okay, good. So this is, of course, about the overconfidence bias. So clearly, this is a pretty serious issue. All right, so this is the assessment. And I'd like to do a poll to see how, and there are 27 more questions like this. Now, how valuable do you think it would be for you and your team, your group, your organization to take the assessment and address the cognitive biases uncovered by the assessment? Please go ahead and vote. See that 2/3 of you participated, so I'll give 5 more seconds. Make your voice heard. Okay, good. So we see that, yeah, so people find mostly highly valuable, 4/5 of you, and the other 5 finds it moderately valuable. So great. So take the assessment yourself. I'll send you a copy after the presentation and apply it, take it yourself, have your group take it to the extent that you can get other people to take it, do that as well, because they'll help everyone address these cognitive biases. Okay. Now, once you uncover these cognitive biases, what can you do? Well, there are 5 questions you can use to avoid decision disasters. So this is a very effective technique that helps you address a number of cognitive biases. So it's 5 questions you can use that address a number of cognitive biases, prevent them in advance while you're making the decision, and to give you a good enough answer. So this is not perfect. This is not a technique that's meant to take for the most important decisions, and when you're making a very important hire or something like that, but for, or figuring out your application for a very huge grant. But for a decision that's kind of everyday decisions that you take, 5-10 times a day, it's fine. It's good enough. So it's for good enough decisions. It'll take you a couple of minutes once you learn how to use this technique, and I'll send you a decision aid that you can use to do it. It's also a very good technique to do with a group, because what you can do is you can have everyone in a group answer the 5 questions before you come to a decision-making meeting, and then structure the decision-making meeting around your agenda, around each of the 5 questions. So start it by having everyone read their answers to each of the questions, and then discuss everyone's answers until you come to a consensus of some sort. Move through the 5 questions, and you can be very confident that you have a pretty good decision at the end, and it'll take much shorter than regular group decision-making meetings. So for individuals, for groups, very helpful. First question, what important information didn't I yet fully consider? So what evidence didn't you take into account? We tend to not fully consider evidence that goes against our beliefs, that goes against our intuitions. As we talked about before, our intuitions are very powerful. To address that, try to look twice as hard for evidence that goes against your beliefs. Try to prove yourself wrong, in other words. Try to disconfirm your beliefs. Imagine that there is an external peer reviewer within you who is trying to prove you wrong. So try to prove yourself wrong before it gets to that peer review. Try to figure out how this situation, this grant, this proposal, this paper can be criticized, and address these criticisms in advance. Address the decision problems in decision in advance. Now, that's one part of this question. The other part is important information. So the one part is that fully consider, another is important. You don't want to get stuck on analysis paralysis. And in order to not get stuck on analysis paralysis, you want to decide what information is actually important. What should you consider? And what should you ignore, leave out, because it's not very important? Next, what dangerous judgment errors haven't I yet fully addressed? So what evidence didn't you take into account? There are a number of dangerous judgment errors. We talked about several of them already, and the assessment will provide you with more information about the others. Next, what would a trusted and objective advisor suggest I do? So what would they suggest you do in this situation? Think about that angel on your shoulder. Think about a mentor figure. You take yourself outside of yourself and say, what would you tell someone in your situation to do? We get a lot of the benefit, 50% of the benefit or so, just by taking outside, but just by getting that external perspective on ourselves and saying, well, what would I suggest to someone in a similar situation? Or what should someone do in a similar situation? And you get the other 50% of the benefit by going to a mentor, going to an external coach, consultant, or someone like that. Maybe going to your dean, of course, going to your mentor if you're a student. So next, you're transitioning from making the decision to implementing it. Even if you make the decision and it's right, if you don't implement it well, you're kind of not going to get the right outcome. So how have you addressed all the ways this could fail? So think about that. How have you addressed all the ways, all the problems with this decision, all the ways it could fail? And try to address them in advance, because now that you've thought about it, you can address them. And finally, what new information would cause you to revisit this decision? What would cause you to change your mind about this decision? So for example, if you're thinking about applying for a grant, and what would the program manager tell you that would cause you to rethink your assumptions about applying for a grant, or something like that? Think about what would cause you to change your decision, to change your mind. What new information can you find out? And that's because we tend to be stuck to a decision once we make a decision. It's called post-factum rationalization. But if we decide in advance that certain information will change our minds, we will not be nearly as stuck to the decision, and we can change our minds much more freely. So again, very effective technique for both individuals and groups. As you can see, it takes only a couple of minutes to do, just to answer these questions. If it's right for individuals, it takes a couple of minutes to do, and if you find the decision is wrong, you definitely want to take the time to redo it. For a group, it really shortens decision-making meetings, and it helps you be much more confident that you get the right decision out of the meeting. Now let's do a poll on this one, the 5 questions technique. How valuable do you think it would be for you and your team to implement this technique, to make good enough decisions? Please go ahead and vote. All right, so I see that this is, I think, the most popular yet. So over 80% popularity as highly valuable. Great. So again, I'll send you the decision aid and you'll be able to start using this technique. All right. So the key takeaways from this presentation: normalcy bias, planning fallacy, and overconfidence bias are the three biggest challenges that I've seen for engineers undermining decision making. I need to assess and address these cognitive biases using the assessment, and the 5 questions to avoid decision disasters are very helpful to make good enough decisions every day. The key takeaways. Now, if you're watching this after the presentation, then you can go to tinyurl.com/JE event to get the resources. So tinyurl.com/JE event. But otherwise, I will send you the assessment and I will send you the decision aid after the presentation, as well as a sample chapter from my best-selling book, Never Go With Your Gut: How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. And you can indicate whether you would like the resources or not in this poll. In the meantime, I'll be happy to take any questions.
So I could start with one, I think.
Sure, Steve.
What's the balance on when we look at the 5 key questions? There's a certain amount of lead time. Is that going to discourage people, do you think? Because, oh, well, I have to prep for this meeting. I can't just go in. And how would you address that?
Yes, of course. It forces people to actually prep for a meeting. That's right. Well, the thing is, people know that the way the meeting is structured, or you need to inform them, and that the way the meeting is structured is that everyone reads their answer at the start of the meeting to each question. So if they have not answered the questions, they're kind of, out of luck. It will be very obvious to everyone, and no one wants to be in that position. So I've observed groups, the first time that somebody was in that position, afterward, everyone actually did their homework. Everyone prepped. So yes, it's definitely something that you need to inform people, that everyone will be expected to read their answer, and then just have that. And it doesn't take a long time to answer these questions. It takes a couple of minutes. So yes, it forces people to prep, and that's kind of the point, because then they're actually going to do the work.
Yeah. And you get better results out of the meeting.
Of course, yeah, that's the point, that you get better results. People are prepped, you get better results. So you're using an evidence-based methodology that's coming from behavioral science, neuroscience, that actually gets at these cognitive biases. So you get a lot of benefits at once.
So at the university, we have somebody who does decision-making coursework. It might not be bad for me to introduce you to him as well, if
Sure.
you'd be open to that.
Sure.
I don't think he's on campus right now, but
Introduce me when he's on campus.
I have your email. I'll go ahead and do that quick introduction, maybe.
Sure.
So anyone else have any questions or thoughts? Apparently Mizzou has fallen off of the internet this afternoon, so I'll follow up with them though.
All right. No worries. Well, I hope everyone has benefited from this, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, Gleb.
You're welcome.